It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday evening, and I was just leaving the office. I was exhausted after a long day, but smiled as my Uber driver asked me how it went. We were just casually chatting, slowly making our way to the Midtown Tunnel, when he said something that stopped me cold. He was only a few weeks out of open heart surgery. I learned he was supposed to be on bed rest for at least 3 months, and instead, he's putting in 14-hour shifts behind the wheel. Why? Because he was now 2 months behind on rent. His recent medical bills had wiped out all of his savings, and he was terrified of losing his home, of his 7-year-old daughter, Alyssa, and his 12-year-old daughter, Kendra, ending up on the streets. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and told me he had never missed a rent payment before. I asked, have you applied to rental assistance programs? Trying to think of some way to help and knowing that New York City has services set up for situations just like his. His voice cracked as he told me he'd applied to every single one. Everyone had turned him away. I sat in the silence of that car and I felt something break at me. I realized our systems aren't set up to keep him and his family in their home. Instead, we wait until they've lost everything to intervene. When I say homelessness, it probably brings a certain image to mind. You could be picturing someone living on the sidewalk in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, or asking for spare change on the New York City subway. I want you to put that image aside for a second and instead picture a single mom living in the Bronx. She has 2 young kids, works full-time, and after years of suffering has found the strength to separate from an abusive partner. Her paycheck now needs to stretch twice as far, and despite doing everything that she can, she's fallen behind on rent and her landlord is threatening eviction. Picture a couple living in Queens. They both work in the public school system, have a son with a severe disability, and their insurance doesn't cover the cost of his medication. His need for around-the-clock care has forced one of them to leave their jobs, and they cannot continue to make rent and pay for his medicine. So the rent was the first thing to go. Picture my driver that evening. A man who did everything right until his heart gave out. A man whose life was saved by the emergency room, but whose livelihood was destroyed by it. This is real. It exists in every single community, yet we rarely talk about it. Here's some of the data from my home. In New York, the street homelessness that we see accounts for 1% of the overall homelessness crisis. If we include everyone in shelters, that still only gets us to 10%. So where's the other 90? They are the invisible majority. They're the 830,000 New Yorkers that are living with rental arrears, which means they have overdue unpaid rents and are at risk of losing their homes. Now, with this in mind, I want to talk about a solution many of you might not know exists. For the last few years, I've worked with a nonprofit called the Partnership to End Homelessness. Their mission is simple: ending homelessness by preventing it. They work with New York City-based clients who are on the verge of losing their homes, help them navigate city services, and then make a one-time grant payment to clear the outstanding rent that they owe. The work is thoughtful, compassionate, comprehensive, but as a former investor who was asked to look at the world through numbers, what I found most compelling were the unit economics. In New York City, the average rent owed by a tenant at risk of losing their home is roughly $3,500. That means that the partnership can keep a family in their home with a single payment of a few $1,000s. And once their clients have stabilized, 93% never need additional rental assistance, and stay housed. Now let's consider the alternative. If we let a family lose their home, the cost to the city of New York for a typical 18-month shelter stay is roughly $100,000. As a society, we are actively choosing to spend 30 times more addressing this crisis rather than preventing it. Now, you might be wondering, looking at these numbers, why aren't we allocating every spare dollar to prevention? 2 reasons: the high cost of shelter services and the invisibility of prevention. The crisis bucket is massive because it has to be. Shelters offer critical but capital-intensive services, and once we have that infrastructure set up, we have an obligation to fund it, and it's really hard to move resources away. 2, prevention's success is invisible. Voters and politicians are incentivized to act when they see a problem staring them in the face. We see tents and encampments, and solving that feels like a win. But when prevention works, nothing happens. A family stays in their home. A child continues to attend the same school. We don't have a ribbon-cutting ceremony when a family doesn't get evicted. Because of that, we systematically underfund the approach. And despite record levels of funding going against this crisis, last year, homelessness rates reached their highest level since the Great Depression. We need a new solution, and I saw what that could look like at the partnership. However, last year, the organization was forced to turn away many eligible individuals, not because the model didn't work, but because they ran out of cash. The partnership operates on a budget of about $3 million. Seems like a lot, but is a fraction of the nearly $100 million budget of many shelter-focused nonprofits. Now, those organizations are doing important, life-saving work, but they are bailing out a boat while we continuously refuse to patch a leak. If we could shift capital upstream and fund prevention like we address the crisis, we wouldn't just save homes. We would unclog shelters, relieve pressure on city services, save billions of dollars and millions of lives. But that requires that we get people who don't see prevention on their walk to work to view it as not only the most humane option, but the most financially responsible one too. Luckily, today I'm standing in a room of leaders, and I'm asking that each of you take a small part in helping make that change happen by leaving here with 3 easy to-dos. 1, view homelessness as a preventable tragedy. Remember that in addition to the street homelessness that we see, there are millions of other people living on the brink. 2, share one thing you learned here today with someone who isn't in the room, and I mean it. Text your sister. Tell her that $3,500 can save a home. Call a friend and explain that prevention is 30 times cheaper than the emergency response. And lastly, consider supporting prevention-focused nonprofits in your community. I'm sharing a few here today, and I promise you, even a small contribution can go a long way in keeping a home together. Homelessness doesn't end when we build enough shelters. It ends when we stop people from needing them. When we decide that keeping a family in their home safely and permanently is an invisible victory worth fighting for. Thank you.